Now, let's kick off day one. Our opening session is a panel discussion featuring Eric Noonan, CyberSheath's founder, Casey Lang, VP of Compliance, and Rich Barron, VP of Service Delivery. CyberSheath has been at the forefront of CMMC since its earliest days. Back in 2008, when what we now know as CMMC was just a voluntary pilot program, Eric was serving as BAE Systems Chief Information Security Officer. He was among the first to participate in that DoD effort to secure the defense supply chain and even testified before the House Armed Services Committee on its impact to contractors. Joining Eric, Casey Lang brings extensive experience leading compliance programs, guiding organizations through NIST SP 800-171, and preparing them for CMMC certification. Rich Barron heads CyberSheath Service Delivery, helping contractors move beyond checklists to operationalize compliance in a practical, sustainable way. 17 years after those early pilot programs, contractors are still asking that same question. How do we stack up against our peers? To answer, our panel will share insights from the CyberSheath Commission survey by independent research firm Merrill Research, a candid look at the state of compliance across the defense industrial base today. This session sets the stage for CMMC CON 2025 with an eye-opening look at where the industry stands and what it means for your compliance journey.
Hello everybody, I'm Eric Noonan, founder of CyberSheath, and I'm thrilled to be here today with Casey Lang and Rich Barron to talk about the 4th annual State of the Defense Industrial Base report. It's an independent research report that we commission and release for free every year. You can find it here throughout the venue. If for some reason you're not able to find the download, just reach out to sales@cybersheath.com. But what it is it's an independent report put together every year where we hire a third-party analyst firm to go out and talk to members of the defense industrial base. They're not CyberSheath customers. They are not someone we're doing business with. It truly is an independent research study. And to my knowledge, it's the only one in the industry that actually does this. And what we're trying to marry up is, you hear a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt every year with CMMC. But what's the truth? Where are contractors, defense contractors, primes and subs, relative to their ability to get fully compliant with CMMC? And so that's really the goal of this. And this year we're going to do something a little bit different. What we thought about was, Rich and Casey are truly on the front lines of cybersecurity, and they see where customers are, what decisions they're making from a technology perspective, a compliance perspective. When are they going to do it? Are they just trying to get an SPRS score and get an assessment done and kind of live to fight another day? Or are they really doing the actual implementation? And so we wanted to take Rich and Casey's on-the-ground experience and then compare and contrast that with the independent data that comes from the research study. So hopefully this panel is super useful to you. As always, we really value your time, and our objective always when talking to you is to move you further along in your journey to compliance, and hopefully we do that today. So with that, let's jump right in, and we're going to really focus on the top 3 insights that we think you can't ignore if you're in the defense industrial base relative to where CMMC is and where you are in your compliance journey. So we'll talk about the compliance landscape quickly. We'll give you those highlights. And then most importantly, you're going to hear from Rich and Casey around what does it mean for you? What does that look like in the real world? And that's where the value is here. So my job here is to take all their expertise and hopefully tease it out in a way that, again, puts you further along in your journey to compliance. So a little bit about CyberSheath to start, because I think that it's super important when talking about CMMC to know who you're talking to and who you're getting potentially information from. And so CyberSheath's the longest serving provider in this space. We've been around since 2012. We're all internally U.S. citizen led and staffed. We don't outsource anything. Of course, we're a registered RPO with the CMMC AB, with the Cyber AB, and we are ourselves CyberSheath CMMC Level 2 certified, and of course we've got many customers certified as well. We really are the DFAR CMMC experts. We've been on this road for many years, long before it was called CMMC, back when we were really just focused with our customers on DFAR 7012. You can see the statistics there. We've done well over 1,000 assessments for our customers. We've been doing managed services for more than probably 8 years now, focused only on DoD primes and subs. Importantly, and you're going to hear from Casey a little bit about this, we solved the whole problem. And so at 50,000 feet, there's 3 components to the CMMC puzzle. There's the IT piece, the cybersecurity piece, and the regulatory/documentation piece. And we try and meet our customers where they are and solve that whole problem because, as you know, CMMC is really kind of a pass-fail requirement, and so you have to solve the whole problem. So that's what we focus on is meeting you where you are and solving that whole problem. And we like to say that we're customer proven, auditor validated. And the reason I say that, we also, as I mentioned, are fully CMMC level 2 certified. We've gotten many customers through their C3PAO audits, joint surveillance audits, DCMA audits, you name it. So we think that earns us the right to give this presentation today, and I share that so, again, that you know where and who you're getting your information from, at least in this session. So let's talk quickly about the compliance landscape. As many of you know, Katie Arrington is back in DoD, and she really has been truly the force of nature behind CMMC in the first Trump administration, and now as the performing the duties of the Department of Defense Chief Information Officer concurrently as she performs her full-time day job as the Chief Information Security Officer for the Department of Defense. And I won't read the slide to you today, but I share this just to show that there really hasn't been any kind of deceleration. In fact, it's all been acceleration relative to CMMC. And you can see clearly how Katie feels about CMMC and defense contractors achieving compliance. And so I don't think you really have to strain to read the tea leaves on why compliance can't wait and how this administration and the current executives at the DoD feel about compliance. So with that, again, quick backdrop, let's get to the meat of the presentation where I think hopefully there'll be a lot of value for you. And let's jump into some of the highlights of this 4th annual independent survey State of the DIB report. So one of the things that comes up year over year, we ask the respondents or the third-party research firm asks the respondents to this survey where they are relative to SPRS submission, where they are relative to their confidence of their ability to comply and their actual ability to comply. And you can see here that confidence does not equal compliance. And I won't read the slide to you, but I think this is really interesting. There's some things that are hard to square here. And maybe, Casey, we could start with you. And what do you see that might explain the disconnect where 70% of contractors are marking themselves as compliant via self-assessment, but only 30% are compliant when truly being evaluated using NIST 800-171A? What do you think the gap is there?
Yeah, I think some of that might be NIST 800-171A itself. Historically, a lot of these contractors have looked at the standard, the framework, the requirements, which are NIST 800-171, and not strongly considered the assessment objectives that are defined in NIST 800-171A. So when it comes to NIST 800-171A getting a lot more attention now than it had been in the past, there was kind of pencil whipping of the assessment at the requirement level before, and now we have this more. I think the forcing function is the auditors leveraging NIST 800-171A to assess at that level of granularity. And there's a lot of cascading things in NIST 800-171A that present themselves when you look at the assessment objectives versus just the requirements. Example being strong focus on documentation, verbs within the framework like define, specify, identify, which means write down, where in the past, if you think, I always give the example of password complexity. You can have password complexity in place, but if there's 2 assessment objectives, implement password complexity and define what it is in writing, you haven't met the requirement if you're not also subsequently writing down what password complexity is for your organization.
It's a great example, Casey. And, it makes me think as you're giving that explanation, and I look at this slide, and again, the full research is available for download throughout the venue, or you can reach out to someone from the CyberSheath team. But one of the ways as an audience member, and Casey, when you talk about things like define and some of the verbs that interestingly are actually in NIST 800-171A, it made me think of, well, if I were in someone's shoes, if I was the CISO, if I was the director of IT, and I had to kind of sell this internally to say, we need to go do this, we need to get to compliance. One opportunity is maybe to take this independent research, and then, if you're running into executive resistance of, I thought we already did this. We did our SPRS submission. We've been working on CMMC for 2 years. Why aren't we done? Maybe use this research and some of the things Casey just shared around how it has to go to a deeper level. You have to actually document it. You have to have artifacts to prove that you're actually compliant. And there's a whole lot of doing that go well beyond the surface level. So just some thoughts on, again, how you might take this research and use it to get yourself further along the journey to compliance if you hit that executive resistance. Rich, one of the things that I'd love to hear from you is that when you're talking to customers, are there any core components in either IT or security? Rich, you kind of straddle both sides, and specific technologies that are red flags, meaning that if a customer or prospect has not implemented these technologies yet, there's a lot of work to do before they can achieve full compliance. Anything that jumps out to you?
Yeah, a couple things jump out. And it's going to be foundational technology. So I think of things around if somebody doesn't have a centralized configuration management platform or a centralized identity platform, how are we going to identify who users are? How are we going to harden the environment, change configurations, snap things into alignment? I've also seen the opposite of that, where there's multiple platforms for configuration management and not really a unified solution that also introduces other complexities. Or it's like, hey, yeah, we have Active Directory, we have a work group, we have some people connected to the cloud, but they all have to be compliant. Those usually start to be some just not necessarily red flags, but just indicative of, hey, we've got some work here to be done. And sometimes it's, it just happens not necessarily by choice. It could be like an acquisition integration that started and then never finished because priorities shifted. There's almost always a reasonable explanation to how we at least got there, but then it's staying focused on the mission and get to the finish line. And then kind of looking at it from both the IT and security lens, I think about business critical platforms, ERPs, or even homegrown things. I've seen a lot of either old on-prem SharePoint environments or on-prem Exchange, just platforms that either through a combination of, oh yeah, the old team set it up, they're gone. We know we need to get rid of it, but we don't have anybody to do it. Those are just things that it's not necessarily a red flag, but it's just a large lift that stands in the way of progress on the compliance journey, that, things that we at least have to say, okay, before we really start on many other objectives, let's get some of these critical ones out of the way.
I love those examples, Rich. Something gritty and in the trenches like configuration management. It's not incident response. It's not vulnerability management. It's not those kind of high level things that, sometimes I think if a customer is, or a contractor within the defense industrial base has implemented incident response or vulnerability management, that's where the confidence of, yeah, we did that, can lead to the idea that maybe we're fully compliant. But then you get into the real hard work, the blocking and tackling of configuration management, change management, things like that. Those are great examples. So, Casey, what advice would you give to a contractor to get off on the right foot and make sure their SPRS score does, in fact, reflect their actual state of compliance as measured by NIST 800-171A? And really what I'm trying to get at is, how do they avoid overscoring and undercomplying?
Yeah, and I think just the use of NIST 800-171A is a great starting point. The SPRS scoring, as we know it today, hasn't prescribed the use of NIST 800-171A, so it does need to happen. I mentioned the kind of writing verbs, but there's more verbs than just writing verbs. There is kind of go and implement or establish verbs. There is words that are more operational in nature, so doing the actual work defensively. And always look through the lens of, am I doing this in a way that can be demonstrated, or can I provide a screenshot? Because ultimately, when it comes to being ready for an audit or a certification attempt, you are going to be expected to demonstrate. So look at those 320 assessment objectives, consider what it's asking, and always ask yourself, is this something that I can demonstrate to an auditor, not just my opinion?
Yeah, it reminds me again, Casey, some of this is maybe flashbacks, prior to founding CyberSheath when it was with BAE Systems, and Casey was part of the core team. We did the first ever actually assessment. It wasn't NIST 800-171A at the time, but similar control, all based on NIST 800-53 at the time. And one of the things that I struggled with was the idea that there was a kind of a view internally that, like, aren't we already doing this stuff? Aren't we already patching? Aren't we already kind of keeping track of our assets? Don't we know who already has admin rights? And so there may be a view at 50,000 feet at the executive level that these things are already happening. And what Casey just shared, yeah, but you have to have the artifact. You have to have the evidence. And so an opportunity that you may take that could be useful to you in trying to sell CMMC internally, because I know sometimes there's a view of, well, it's compliance. You have to do it. Well, the have to do it versus the actually doing it, there can be a wide gap there, is creating a roadmap to say, yes, we are doing patching. We use these tools. We made this investment. Here's what we're doing. But we're not collecting the artifacts, or we're not doing it on a routine basis, or we haven't documented the frequency and kind of process behind our patch management, just as one example. And so you could create a little bit of an executive maturity roadmap, is what we did at the time, to show kind of here's where we are, here's where we need to get, and here's the key milestones to go from to. And I think, executive teams typically think in those terms, like how far to get where I need to go, and what are the critical milestones along the way. And maybe this research and this session today can help you think using that framework to get the internal investments that you surely need to be successful. So in addition to confidence not equaling compliance, CMMC is pretty complex, and the survey, you can see the results here. Many of the respondents felt that it's very difficult and it's very complicated. And so, Rich, I would say the complexity is real. I think that you see it up close and personal every day in your role, working with manufacturers, architecture and design firms, tool and die makers. I mean, the solution can be different for every kind of business and everything in between. So how do you approach what can be very difficult use cases and technical architectures depending on the business? Take me through 2 or 3 different implementations where you've solved for compliance based on a unique line of business or business case, or something that's, where they're not just office workers, where you can just kind of secure an endpoint in a secure facility.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head that, like, there's always going to be an element of discovery to help, just because of no 2 companies are the same, no 2 processes are the same. So that's where it becomes a lot more hands-on. So kind of thinking about in the manufacturing space, like we see a lot of OT or embedded systems. I had a customer who had a couple of manufacturing lines, and most of the key machinery were running embedded operating systems, custom operating systems. And, as for those of you that know in that space, like if they are running like a flavor of Windows embedded and you want to get it to, if it's end of life, you want to get it to like the next level. Oftentimes that is a $10,000s to hundreds of thousands of dollars to get the machine recertified. And oftentimes that's just not in the budget to do. So in those cases, like, we're actually going boots on the ground, engaging with the engineering stakeholders just to understand the technical workflows. And then the product of that discussion and discovery becomes architecting strong network segmentation and building a proper compliant perimeter around these specialized assets. And then that way we then engage with Casey's team, go through the documentation and processes just to, make sure that now that we've solved the technical problems, we're then going through the compliance outcomes and documenting everything that we're taking advantage of with those outcomes. And then looking at this from like maybe architecture, design, or civil engineering, there's often situations where we're forced to meet the customer where they are. And especially if there's like physical instruments where it's like, hey, we've got to go out into the field, we have to take measurements, or otherwise take something from the real world and then load it back into an environment. So we've got a number of customers that use secure enclaves that are cloud native. But in order for them to help get these data sets that are brought into the enclave, we'll help customers build out secure rooms at their physical points of presence that have the required connectivity and security that lets them maintain their regular business workflows and not just, block or otherwise inhibit those functions from occurring. So, a big part of this too, in both the manufacturing example and, like the civil engineering examples, is that we have to understand what the business is doing, what our client is doing, so we can meet them where they are and develop a solution that not only checks the box for CMMC, but also checks the box for our customer and their workflows, and that they don't have to throw out the book and start over for, a key component of their own business.
Yeah, it's such a great point, Rich. I mean, it almost feels odd to say out loud, in the sense that I've heard so much misinformation where contractors are kind of told you have to change your entire business workflow and how you do business, and you have to, you can't print, and just all this crazy myth and legend, when the reality is, if you have the right team internally, externally, some combination of the two, there's solutions to fit CMMC on top of your business versus say you need to change your whole business. And I think those are key points, Rich. And I appreciate that kind of experience that you've shared, because it's very relevant, I think, to many folks in our audience who come from industries where they have to print, or they have manufacturing, or multi-sites, or only part of the business is DoD and some meaningful portion is commercial, et cetera. And with that, Casey, it's not just technical, right? Much of it is operational, process, and people-driven. So how do you think about the documentation, Casey? Think about SSP, system security plans, incident response, POAMs, plan of action, milestones, et cetera, as it relates to reducing complexity and not keeping multiple sets of books. What's your advice? And if you could use some real world examples, that would be great, just to be helpful for our audience to understand, how do you minimize the complexity as it relates to documentation?
Practical is best. First and foremost, when it comes to a governance framework, aligning with the standard or the structure of NIST 800-171 is pretty helpful. It helps with kind of really just making things easier for the auditors when they're going down a framework. They're looking at access control, identity authentication. You do have the implicit requirements in Appendix E of NIST 800-171 to have policies and procedures for each control family. So that's a good starting point. If you're fractured, if you started down an ISO path in the past and you no longer have an ISO framework, align with the framework that you have. Choose the framework and align against it. Makes things easier in the end. Aside from that, just understand what your CMMC readiness package would look like. There are some core pieces of documentation. System security plan is the North Star document. If there was anywhere that I was going to start with documentation, it would be the system security plan, because that's your opportunity to tell a story of and narrate against the requirements. The more granular you can get in alignment with NIST 800-171A, the better, because the questions that the auditors are going to ask. So tell a story against each assessment objective. And then from there, consider you need a governing policy and procedures, so align with the framework, and then user-directed policies, which is often like an acceptable use policy or an employee handbook, the thing that would go out to the wide audience and communicate alignment with the particular requirements in the framework. Incident response plan is a key one. It's called out. You need to have one and test against it. But when I say practical is key, strong alignment with the framework itself, and then don't overthink things. You want to lay out descriptions and policies that are easy to interpret and hard to misinterpret. A lot of times, if you're over documenting, that just creates burden during the audit or assessment process. Be crisp, be clear, and be in consideration of your scoped environment. Scope your environment effectively around the regulated data set, CUI. NIST 800-171 is a data-centric framework, so you certainly want to be geared towards that in the end, because you are expected to control and manage the flow of CUI and build your program around it.
Based on the way both of you shared kind of in your approach to complexity, it kind of leads me to a question around documentation and technology deployment, because both of those things potentially have to run in parallel, or maybe not. Maybe it's serial. I'd love to hear your advice. Maybe I'll start with you, Casey, around the idea that you're deploying a meaningful amount of new technologies potentially. If you haven't fully deployed multi-factor authentication yet, or you don't have FedRAMP authorized tools, et cetera, that's new technology that has to come online. You're doing a migration to GCC, GCC high, whatever it is. So you're either updating existing documentation meaningfully or potentially writing it because it didn't exist before. So how do you think about that? Is that something that needs to be done serially and in parallel? And I'll ask you that, Casey, and then I'll have a follow-on for you, Rich.
Yeah, I think those two things can certainly happen in parallel. Now, typically we're starting with an assessment, and that's going to inform the remediation work. And the remediation has two paths. There's kind of the administrative and documentation lane, and then there's the technical side, which could be point-in-time fixes or kind of operational activities, like think eyes on logs and monitoring. But the documentation piece doesn't have to come before the technical piece, because the technical piece is all based on the same requirements. You have the requirements built in a standard, NIST 800-171. You can go and get to work in resolving both ends. And in the end, you don't have to have a written policy to go and deploy technologies, point-in-time fixes, or get operational. Those things should all happen in tandem.
And so, Rich, the flip side of that, on the technology side, how do you typically coordinate, be it with an internal group at a customer who is responsible for documentation, or even the team Casey's put together over the years? Like, how does that coordination look like? Is it a project plan? Is it a PMO? Is it kind of monthly touch points? Like, you're doing active work around procuring, deploying, configuring, maintaining technologies. You can't get too far ahead of the documentation. What's that look like?
Casey had mentioned that, a lot of it is driven by the POAM that becomes our to-do list, post-assessment of like, hey, here's what needs to be implemented. And then so from a PMO function internally here at CyberSheath, that's where we're looking at, okay, here's the tech that we need to go get. Here's what we know about the environment. Sometimes, unique to that customer or to that environment, we also might have to, in engaging with their stakeholders, and then bring in Casey to have a question around like, hey, is this widget, is this platform, is this piece of software CMMC compliant, this or cloud process? So like, we'll also spend a lot of time internally with our compliance stakeholders to just make sure that we can actually even get that product to the finish line. We have our own catalog of battle tested, audit proven technologies like our multi-factor authentication and our security platforms. But if there's something that also has to come from the client side or a blocker that they have to solve for, we're also working with the compliance folks just to make sure that like, okay, before we even go hands-on keyboard, can we even get there? And then if we do pass, that's when we're piloting the tech, to the point of like, we'll get the technology implemented at the same time as we're drafting that documentation, promoting it into build standards that we can then share back with Casey's team. So then it all gets properly memorialized into the SSP. And at the end of the day, we're still then making sure that the technology is serving its correct purpose.
An amazing amount of coordination has to happen. And it's why, again, we focus, and we think you need to focus as well, on solving the whole problem, because you can't just deploy the technologies and make sure everything's working from kind of an availability perspective. You also have to document that. You also have to collect artifacts. You also have to make sure your POAMs are getting closed out and documented properly. So there really is a solve the whole problem requirement to this. Staying on the technology theme, I think it's, there's a lot of technology, required for CMMC compliance, but and you can see that, there's less than 40% adoption in some essential areas, and there's a laundry list of technology on the right-hand side. But I wanted to do here is focus on what I'll say the technology that kind of most matters. And one of the things compliance frameworks get a lot of flack for, I think rightfully so, is that, they become checkbox exercises. That's not the case with CMMC, and it's one of the reasons I love it. You've probably heard Katie Arrington say it many, many, many times. But CMMC actually, when you actually do the work and deploy the technologies, as required, you're required anyway, so that's like a good enough reason to do it. But if you actually want to improve security, CMMC is probably the framework I'd pick. There's so many meaningful technologies that actually make you more secure, in addition to you had to do it anyway for compliance. So those are the technologies I wanted to focus on. And maybe, Rich, we start with you. As someone who's responded to many incidents and managed the teams that do that over the years, worked directly with U.S. government agencies and foreign government agencies multiple times, I'd love to hear from you and just give me a couple technologies that are both necessary, required for CMMC compliance, but also actually make a difference in improving cybersecurity, and tell me why.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for the easiest one I'm just looking at from the security side is a SIM, but this is probably one where it's less about the tool. I mean, there's a bunch of amazing, up and to the right, Gartner Quadrant SIM products, but really what matters is the mature implementation of it, and that's where you're going to see those dramatic results. If you have a SIM, that's operationalized, but it's barely configured, you have incomplete log sources, you don't have the strongest operators actually working in the SIM, you're going to essentially get yourself to a false sense of security. And we've seen that movie in a couple of sequels where we're brought into organizations who are utilizing these best-in-class platforms, but they're picking up the pieces of how did this incident happen? How did they get in? And there's usually a really simple solution where it's like, oh yeah, we didn't have that log source. We thought it was coming in, it's not, or we were only getting this kind of alert, not this other family. And it's just things around, like, if you have operators in the space and engineering that deeply understand the product and understand how to integrate with it and know what good looks like, that's really the key differentiator, where it's like, it's not just having a great product, it's having a great team behind the product. And then I think another thing too to consider is strong CMDB or configuration management databases. These platforms are super key in mapping and building relationships between your key security protection assets. So like when you think about some like really critical enterprise questions around like, are all of my workstations and servers covered by our EDR or antivirus sensor? Those are questions that you can answer in real time because it's, with a CMDB, you can say, okay, here are all the assets that are in the domain, and then here's everything that's in CrowdStrike. And now I need to figure out how to marry these two together to make sure I've got that one-to-one relationship and that I don't have 100 over here and 80 over here. So those are definitely at least the top two when considering what can dramatically improve some of those security outcomes.
Yeah, just thinking through the going back to if you're interested in taking the concept for those in the audience of like creating a roadmap for your executives. I mean, this technology and kind of the technologies required for CMMC anyway are a way to show progression. Like, yes, we have implemented our security information event management platform. However, it's not fully tuned yet, or we're only 27% through our MFA deployment, whatever it is. And again, you can then show those milestones so that it's not just an ask, it's an ask with a plan and then measured progress along the way. But Casey, as I think about it, well, not on the technical side of the house, the compliance side of the house is probably the first group in doing your assessment using NIST 800-171A that surfaces some of these deficiencies. So what are some of the major deficiencies that you see maybe in the vast amount of assessments you do? Not obvious things like security information and event management or multi-factor authentication, but what are other technologies that you often see are missing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it aligns well with what Rich had mentioned. The showing maturity is a lot easier when you have IT management tools. So a CMDB is a great option, and it's foundational. So asset management in general, that helps everything from IT to even your security function in a lot of cases. Where like if you think of security analyst needs to know who owns what device, they need a reference point. They need to know where that asset exists and who owns it. So that's certainly a foundational one. I will say other tools out there like governance, risk, and compliance tools. We come across those quite a bit in the complete opposite sense. Like defense contractors will buy these tools thinking it will get me to compliance, but it ends up just being a tool to do an assessment, which is not all of the requirements. And it's a bit of a self-service thing that doesn't get you there. So that's a little bit of an overspend and undercomply type of tool. DLP is helpful in some cases, but given the nature of kind of CUI being ambiguous, hard to nail down, and not specified well in contracts, DLP is a little bit of presents more confidence than it should when the data is hard to wrangle in. And then other than that, it's the big programmatic deficiencies that you mentioned, Eric. SIM vulnerability scanning tools, the ability to respond to vulnerabilities with patching tools. You do need those patching tools and mature IT to be able to do the other side of vulnerability management, which is remediation.
And so maybe as I think about that, a lot of technology, I appreciate your point around DLP and the idea that like can give you more confidence than maybe you should have. But thinking about this, and maybe I'll start with Rich and then see how his answer aligns with your perspective in compliance, Casey. But where do you start? Like there's a lot of technology, so security information event management, multi-factor authentication, vulnerability management, those right there, just 3 different tools, right? So where do you start from your perspective, Rich, relative to, is the goal to quickly improve security as quickly as possible and knowing that, you're ticking off, achievement on the compliance scale at the same time? And then, love to hear Casey's view on kind of Rich's answer and how that marries up between the actual technical deployments and the compliance side.
Absolutely. So for me, it's starting with security and kind of the security awareness function, really. And, if you think about with modern cloud-based security platforms, like most SIMs today are cloud-based, most collaboration and identity platforms like Office 365, Entra, and Microsoft's Defender XDR suite, these are all cloud-native platforms. So the benefit there is that there are easy victories to integrate these and stream these events into a SIM product. I know firsthand, like I've had brand new customers of ours who I barely even knew their name, just a couple weeks into their onboarding, and successfully defend them from ransomware events, only because we operationalized the SIM on day one, and we had those core cloud-based connectors coming into the SOC because we didn't know much, but we were at least able to get those relevant log sources in, make fast impacts to improve our own awareness, and then start to hunt after the problem and successfully defend. So it's a combination of getting that real-time data in, and then also getting aware of everything around vulnerabilities inside of the environment. So that's why we're leading also with vulnerability management products in order to assess and look for anything that's super glaring, like, hey, we've got an internet-facing server and it hasn't been updated in 5 years. We might have a firewall that's end of life and it doesn't get security signature updates anymore for the intrusion prevention system. Like those are all things that we can uncover very quickly just by, getting basic assessments of, specific technologies or products that are living inside of the environment.
And so I think there's 2 goals, right? I mean, goal 1 really ultimately at the core of CMMC is actually to improve security of the defense industrial base, no doubt. There's a compliance measurement to that goal for sure. So they may not always be aligned, but I think they are ultimately aligned. So Casey, how do you marry up what Rich just said relative to achieving compliance and kind of increasing your score, for lack of a better phrase?
Yeah, the great thing about NIST 171 is it is a solid framework to align with when it comes to cybersecurity practices. Rich's kind of prioritization is a good one. First and foremost, you want to know, like, is the bad guy in my house? So start monitoring. And is my lock broken? So vulnerability management. But aside from that, kind of in the industry, we still engage with some of these customers early on that are just very immature from a technology standpoint. And if you think of things like, Rich already alluded to this, central authentication. We come across clients that just have workstations from Best Buy that are disconnected and not centrally managed. So everything that you want to do to bring that into central authentication so you can manage everybody effectively in one place, and central management where you can apply configuration. The other thing that I think will get more attention as CMMC continues to mature is perimeter security controls. Everybody sees that as a firewall, but also tying back to a Rich comment, it becomes more critical when you have complex or unique challenges around data scoping. The specialized devices, which are a CMMC scoping category, it's more than just a firewall if you have situations where you do need to apply some logical segmentation. So those those perimeter security controls, the effectiveness of flow control between your CUI environment and a specialized environment. That's going to get a lot more attention. And then again, bringing that all together in a compliance story through the system security plan and the rest of the governing documentation is really key, just to make sure that you are audit ready. Again, you need to tell the story and implement the capabilities, all kind of operationally and defensively. In the end, that's what's going to set you up for success.
And again, I think it gives you an amazing opportunity internal to your business to advocate for the investment required and to tell the story of, as you move up with compliance, you're actually moving up your ability to better defend the enterprise and improve cybersecurity. The charts almost create themselves, really, in terms of how is my compliance score moved up? Well, that measures against SPRS scoring requirement and NIST 800-171A, so you can clearly map that on a chart. And then in parallel to that, overlaid to that, what technologies have we deployed? How much more visibility are we getting relative to the events that we're responding to? And you can really tell the from to story, which I think can help hopefully justify the return on investment. So I think hopefully you'll be able to use a lot of this data and what you're hearing today to, again, get yourself further along in your journey to compliance. And so really what this all means for you is that obviously CMMC is here. It's not going away. The leadership at the Pentagon at the highest levels responsible for this program has reinforced, and you've seen it with rulemaking and other efforts. It's clearly not going away. So that's one thing. The clock is ticking. This is something you need to do. You need to solve the entire problem, IT, security, compliance, and put the whole solution together so that you can ultimately get through your audit. And then finally, I think, and I hope what it means for you is that today, what you were able to get was an idea on how to potentially put a roadmap together to advocate for those internal resources that you're required or that you need to get to full compliance, or external, or some combination of the two, to ultimately achieve full CMMC level 2 compliance and improve your cybersecurity. So I hope what we shared with you today was useful, and again, getting you further along in your journey to compliance. And I want to thank Casey and Rich for joining me today and sharing your expertise. If we can be helpful beyond this session, please reach out to us, sales@cybersheath.com. And of course, the full research report is available for download. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you, Eric, Casey, and Rich, for sharing such valuable insights into how DIB contractors are positioned for CMMC compliance today, and for highlighting the top 3 takeaways organizations can afford to ignore.